Welcome to our live event. Today's topic is supply chain capacity shortfalls, labor shortages in the United States. Next. My name is Grover Ryder. I'm the host. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at ResLink, and one of the things that makes it possible for me to do my job is having smart guys like Matt Mills here. He's the Director of Supply Chain Solutions, and he has a lot of experience in the greater supply chain world. Next. So let's start with the big picture. The big picture is you've got your enterprise at the top. You make things, and you have, so I've said, lightly, you've got 100 to 10,000 direct suppliers. You probably have thousands of direct suppliers that you know of. Those suppliers have suppliers. Of this you're very well aware, of course. And then there's a tier 3 to tier N going all the way down to raw materials, sand, aluminum, sheet steel, plastics, things like that. Next. And you have 100% visibility into tier 1. Your ERP knows every one of your direct suppliers. You've got people's names, addresses, and everything. Depending on your company, you have variable visibility into tier 2. You may know half of your sub-suppliers. You may know a third. Some people know only 2 or 3%. Then there's the N tiers, 3 through the bottom. You may have no visibility. I've said 5%. Many companies have 0% visibility into tier 3 and beyond. This causes a set of problems because, let's go to the next section, because primarily when you have things like factory fires, earthquakes, labor shortages, hurricanes, bad weather, political instability, financial risk, all these kinds of things, whenever you have these kinds of issues, you can only see your top tier. And unless you're paying very close attention to your thousands of direct suppliers and potentially your tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of sub-suppliers, you can have an impact in your business that you weren't anticipating. And so we're going to talk about today is how all of this multi-tier supply chain complexity interacts with labor markets, particularly the current labor environment. So at this time, I'm going to turn this over to Matt Mills. This event's being recorded. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Grover. So we're going to really focus on labor shortages in the United States today. But I think when you talk about capacity in general, I mean, there's a lot of capacity constraints coming down the pike that go beyond labor shortages. I was reading this morning about how there's a looming warehousing shortage, and we talk about cobalt and some of the commodity shortages. So it's a very interesting environment right now to be a supply chain professional, and especially one that's trying to get ahead of these things and be managing risk. So let's talk a little bit about the labor markets in the United States, and then we'll talk about what some of the strategies that companies can use to deal with it. So if we look at 2016, this is a map of unemployment by county in 2016. The important thing to know here is that the lighter the color, the lower the unemployment, but also the tighter the labor market. So you can see it was a fairly tight labor market in 2016. The United States was still pretty prosperous and growing, but when you look today, you see a lot more white. So a lot of labor markets tightening up, a lot of jobs and opportunities out there for people to take advantage of, and you can even see some bright white counties in Colorado and in Montana where there's almost 100% employment. And so understanding how your supply chain is exposed to these tight labor markets, and when forecasts change or when new product lines are introduced, and how your suppliers are going to deal with the labor needs to produce your products is going to be really important in the months to come. And along with that, I mean, the issues being exacerbated by the fact that the labor force participation rate continues to fall as well, due to a number of reasons, which we'll talk about in a second. But I also read recently that the United States, as opposed to many other countries in the world, has one of the lowest prime age labor force participation rates in the world, mostly due to its high prison population and its large opioid dependence. So we're already starting with a little bit of a shortage as compared to our competitors in the global economy. And this continues to fall, due to aging populations, due to retiring, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't look like it's, while it's great for workers and there's a lot of opportunities out there and, upward pressure on wages, there's potential supply constraints in supply chains as companies can't hire fast enough to meet the demand. And if you think the answer is, oh, we'll just offshore it or we'll send it abroad, this is actually a global phenomenon. So the lines you see on this chart here, I've highlighted a few kind of key economies, but these are the OECD countries. And you can see pretty much a general trend across all 27 of them for higher employment and lower unemployment. You can see the trend in the United States has been particularly steep as compared to some of the other countries in the world. But this is a global phenomenon, and one that continues to be challenged by a number of issues that are happening in the world. And we're starting to see it hit the press in very profound ways. One is we have a massive truck driver shortage, which we'll go in depth to later in the presentation. But also they're seeing it in Europe as well, where aging populations and emigration to Western economies, which is ironic, because we'll talk about it in a second, is putting a lot of pressure on European growth and European economic expansion as well. And so why does this keep going down, and what are the contributing factors that we feel we have to have a webinar about it? Well, there's a number of things that, primarily bucket into some major geopolitical trends that we're seeing, as well as some demographic shifts. So immigration. So people are both trying to move around more and being restricted from moving around more at the same time. So there's a lot of both kind of dynamism in labor markets because people are moving around so much. I mean, you see people are being restricted from coming in and out of certain countries. There's a lot of new policies and laws being enacted to deal with both legal and illegal immigration. So that's gonna create some havoc in labor markets until those markets kind of settle down a little bit. And that's related, almost directly to the kind of the rise in kind of protectionism in the governments of the major manufacturing countries, trying to become more self-reliant, trying to combat crime and drugs and some of those other issues by protecting their economy and making sure that that their economy is built for their citizens. And kind of reduce the reduction in globalism from that perspective. Then the trade wars, of course, putting up additional upward pressure on prices as we see the tariffs going back and forth on different sets of goods. But also the trade wars are going to drive a lot of companies to look at shifting their supply chains and building a lot more of their goods in the markets where their goods are shipped to. And so that, combined with all this other dynamism in the labor market, is going to create a lot of havoc with regard to labor as well, as those companies make those production and network optimization decisions. And then finally, Brexit. The Brexit's going to have a very profound impact on European labor markets, particularly in the UK. Obviously, there's about 1.8 million EU workers in the UK right now. Estimates are that over 85% of them will not be able to get visas under the new Brexit rules. So there's going to be a massive diaspora of those people, of those workers into other economies, and creating probably a massive labor shortage in the UK as well. Then on the demographic side, we talked a little bit about the aging population. With regard to the trucker strike, one of the statistics that I'll share is that the typical kind of annual trucker retirement rate is about 10%. In the last few years, it's been over 25%. So 1 out of 4 truckers that are on the road today will be retiring tomorrow, which is creating a massive trucker shortage, which is directly related to when we talk about kind of skills mismatches you can look on any job board, and even though there's low unemployment, it's not like the economy is running at full capacity. I mean, there's a ton of jobs out there, but there just aren't people with the right skills to match those jobs. So addressing that training gap and making sure we have both enough skilled and unskilled workers to do jobs like driving a commercial truck is going to be really important if we want to resolve this crisis in the medium to long term. And we're already seeing pressure on commodity prices. So, along with some of the labor shortages and the fuel cost increases, I mean, we're seeing commodity prices rise, and so it's generally lifting the cost to do business in a lot of industries because of these macroeconomic and demographic trends. So what can I do about it? And the answer is, the high-level answer is really just to be able to find and evaluate your critical points of failure. So understanding the critical path to your customers, we'll go into each of these in more detail. Mapping your supply chain to making sure that you understand what locations those critical paths go through and what their exposure is to some of these trends that we're seeing. Assessing supplier capacity plans on a very micro level, so looking at your suppliers and understanding what their plans are to increase or adjust capacity as things change, and then watching for leading indicators of problems. So not just waiting for a supplier to short you, but making sure that you're keeping an eye on certain trends in your supply base to make sure that you get ahead of shortages and do the right things to mitigate those issues. So first is understanding the critical path to your customers, and a lot of procurement professionals focus very, very highly on spend. Is who are the customers or who are the suppliers I'm spending the most with? What are the customers on my my key high spend strategic commodities? And while those things are important, any 1 cent part can shut down a supply chain just as easily as a $1,000 part can. So understanding how your supply chain is related, particularly to the products that you ship to your customers, and what are your most important products is kind of the first step in doing that. So that can be defining it as highest revenue or margin contribution. That can be what's contributing to your growth in the future. What are the strategic aims of your business, and what are those products that are important to that? And then also what's the highest brand reputation value? So when we talk about pharmaceutical companies, which of your drugs are life-saving drugs? When you talk about technology companies, which are the kind of the cutting-edge technologies that your brand is dependent on, and how do I understand what the supply chain is to go into those most important of products that I'm providing to my customers? And then understanding what suppliers are critical. So again, we talked about not just highest spend, but what are your single sole source products, and what are the design and what are the design dependency products that even if they're multiple source, maybe there's only 2 people in the world to provide them. What are those things that are really key to my product and the critical path in getting that product to my customer, and how can I focus in on the capacity of those suppliers to make sure that I'm protecting what's most important to me. So once we understand who are those suppliers and how their importance ranks in our supply chain with regard to our critical products, we need to make sure we know where they're located and where they're shipping from. On the right-hand side here, you see the map we showed earlier with the 2018 unemployment rate, and on the left-hand side you see I pulled out all of the states that have an unemployment rate of 3.5% or less. You can see there are a number of states here that have a significant number of manufacturing footprints based on the sites we have mapped in Resolink. So Colorado, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Indiana, Virginia, Massachusetts, and Tennessee all have over 500 manufacturing sites. Now, we take a lot of care to make sure that we're looking at not sales office or R&D sites. We're looking at actual manufacturing sites. So these are actually sites that are hiring and using a lot of workers to make sure that they are manufacturing and shipping goods to your customers. So understanding how your supply chain lays out across this map and across the map globally with regard to understanding some of these demographic trends and unemployment rates and tight labor market is really key to making sure that you know where to focus your energy on mitigating this risk. So once we understand that, and once we understand what our exposure is, we can additionally talk to those suppliers and assess their supplier capacity plan. So Resolink can help you map your supply chain. We also have a supplier capacity assessment that we can help you administer and collect a lot of data around what your supplier's capacity plans are. So understanding what percent upsides to forecast they can meet in a 6 or 12-month time frame, how many weeks of inventory on average they hold at the site, how many shifts are possible, how many are they using today, how long would it take to set up another shift. All these types of things play into our overall supplier capacity assessment, where we can help you understand where the constraints might be in the supplier's process, what their plans are, and what kind of the quantitative metrics where they've planned for upside and they have some flexibility to do so, so that you can get a really good picture of a kind of a 360-degree view of this risk around these are the suppliers I have who are in tight labor markets, and these are the constraints that I know they have internally because of the data that I've collected about them. And then we can combine that information with other leading indicators of problems, right? So the first thing you might see as labor gets short and people are working overtime, or they're working on at 80% capacity. The first thing you'll probably see is quality, cost, or delivery problems, right? So being able to track those in real time, combine that with the capacity risk that we help you collect, and then bouncing that against the product criticality analysis that you did to make sure that your most critical products are mitigated first, can really help you to get ahead of the problem and work with your suppliers to understand and come up with solutions to the capacity problem. So just understanding the problem and getting ahead of it first, making sure that you're the first to secure whatever slack capacity is out there is really the first key to making sure that you're ready to address it. Just to talk a little bit about a small case study here about the trucker shortage. So I talked about at a high level that we're seeing this before. It's always expected to get worse due to the retirement rates and the lack of desire for younger people to enter this profession. But right now there's a shortage of about 50,000 truck drivers nationwide. That's expected to almost double in the next 3 years. And then, of course, weather is always a problem, and we talk a lot about weather here at Resolink because we're constantly monitoring the weather and providing that to our customers. But there's also a backlog in deliveries because of some of the weather we've had recently. And so as a result, freight shipping rates have soared 30–80% over the past year. General Mills has said that it's using that pricier spot market for 20% of its shipments, which is 4 times more than it typically does. And of course, that's funneling right to the bottom line and resulting in less returns to shareholders and lower operating profits. And from a customer's perspective, how that's impacting them is, shipments are late. 5% of refrigerator cases and store shelves are empty because of these late deliveries, and that's gonna impact your customer satisfaction and your brand as well. So we're seeing brand impact, we're seeing profitability impact all across this one shortage in this one industry. So if we talk about the labor shortages writ large, you can imagine that this is going to manifest itself in a number of different areas over the next few months. So what can we do about it? So we talked a little bit about all these, but understanding the kinds of capacity constraints, collecting data. We want data around where this is going to hit us first, and where we should start addressing it now. And so we can explore options for upsides and alternate sources and work with our suppliers on kind of creative ways to address this issue. And working across multiple tiers, and this is a challenge for a lot of companies to look across multiple tiers and understand where that critical path flows to their customers, not only through their first tier, but also to their second tier. And so getting a lot of data, and you know, we can help you with this here at ResLink, getting a lot of data around the tiers and where that critical path is, so that you can expand this analysis down the tiers of your supply chain and deal with it on a holistic basis. And so the net impact is, you know, we're all, you know, subjected to the same markets, and you know, the interesting thing about the truck drivers is, you know, they cut across so many different industries. I mean, every industry depends on over-the-road transportation to some degree. So if you can understand those supplier capacity in advance, work with your suppliers to resolve those issues. It's all about getting ahead of it and securing that capacity for your company. And then finally, I mean, I think this is kind of the motherhood and apple pie part of the presentation, but I mean, it's all about having good relationships and collaborating with your customers. You know, taking this regimented approach and collecting this data, that's certainly the first step. But making sure that, you know, you're sharing that approach with your suppliers, encourage them to take a similar approach with their suppliers, or even, you know, go into your go into those exercises, you know, together as kind of a unified front to their next tier down suppliers, and work together to resolve these shortages. And you know, be creative here. I mean, there's a lot of sharing that can go on. You know, excuse me. You know, sharing resources, whether it's if you have some slack capacity in your factory, and you can, you know, move some contractors or some supplier resources into your factory to help them make sure that they meet your deliveries on time. That's something to consider. I mean, outsourcing to third party or outsourcing firms, optimizing your processes. I mean, there's nothing like a good crisis to make sure that, you know, you're doing all the right things and cutting the fat out of your operations to make sure that your processes are optimized. And then obviously automation. Automation can't solve all the problems, and it has its own problem to solve with that. But I mean, this is probably a good time to kind of take a look at the technology that's out there, and making sure that you're making the best use of it that you can. And then I guess the last bullet there is really just about, you know, challenging times or where, you know, the bonds are strengthened or really broken. So find your key partners. Make sure that you guys are working together to find creative solutions to problems, as we talked about above, and make sure that you reward those partnerships, whether it was with long-term agreements or you know, contractual terms, to make sure that they see you through this time, because this is a situation that's not a quick fix. It's not a hurricane where we're going to rebuild and we'll know when we're done when we're done. This has the potential to be a trend that's going to be pervasive for the next few years, until all these this dynamism and these shakeups kind of funnel their way out, and things settle down. So that's all I had. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Matt. So the first question we have is, just about everybody on this meeting seems to want those maps. And so they want to know, can we get the maps? So the answer is, first of all, yes, we will send everybody. We can send everybody the PDF, which has the maps in here. And I'm with the folks that are attending. That was pretty useful information. I'm glad you compiled that. And I guess the second set of questions, by the way, we'll be sending everybody a recording of this event also. And then the second key set of questions is around how do they figure out the actual impact by part or by site, because most of these folks, it seems like their ERP has effectively the headquarters. And so how would they actually get to know if they have exposure to one of those bright white states, and what process do they go through?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, I mean, that's not an atypical issue where you probably know all your tier 1 suppliers, as you said in the first slide, and your ERP system has all that information there. But a lot of times that information that's in your ERP system is, you know, where you're paying your bills, not necessarily where the parts are produced, right? So that's where, you know, doing the part site mapping and engaging a technology like Resolink and the services we provide to provide you additional visibility into where your supply is actually coming from, and being able to plot those sites on top of that great unemployment map that we provided you with is really valuable. So it's really just, I mean, it's really just data collection and putting the resources and engaging the partners who can help you collect that data such that you can make that part to site connection. Then once you make that part to site connection, you can start to ask those specific questions around those suppliers that are in that critical path that are showing lack of attention to potential capacity shortages, and have those part level conversations to make sure that you're doing the right things with regard to your sourcing strategies there.
Okay, so then once they figured, and again, the next question is, once they figured that out, how do they then take that and turn that into actionable? How do they figure out, well, there's, you know, I could look somewhere else. How do they figure out where else to look to find alternative sites or sources? Or is it really just a case of they have to reach out to suppliers and ask them, what do they need to do? What can they do that's information-based, and what do they need to do that's, I'll call it relationship-based? Because a lot of this is coming back to the vendor management questions. I'm getting a flood of vendor management questions. You know, is this what vendor management does? Is this purchasing? What is the deal?
I mean, it's hard to say whose job it is. I mean, in a crisis, it becomes kind of everyone's job, right? But I mean, I would say that, you know, there's a lot of resources that are out there that can, I mean, it's like any other. I mean, we talk about crisis management, right? And while I wouldn't necessarily call this a crisis as yet, maybe it is in some commodities, in some areas, but it's really about engaging a cross-functional team and engaging cross-functionally in your organization with your engineering teams, with your sourcing teams, with your procurement teams, and really trying to find, and to some degree with your suppliers, like we talked about on the last slide, and trying to find those creative solutions to these problems. So looking at everything from your sourcing strategies to your product design to your supplier network to your inventory policies. I mean, it's really, do we want to buy ahead? Do we want to store some inventory inside? Do we want to take on our own strategic inventory? Like, I mean, all those types of decisions have to be made, and it's really on a company by company basis. But it really should be a cross-functional decision. It shouldn't be made in isolation in any one area or organization.
Okay. The next question I have, which I think it's almost a straight person's question, is labor capacity the only thing you should be tracked? What about the financial health? I mean, so the real question is okay, great labor capacity. What about the other risk factors? Is that something they should be tracking too? And I know that we have products around that, so I'll let you try to answer the question as asked.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we're just focusing on one particular stress in the supply chain today, but I mean, as we talked about, I mean, the labor issue is related to so many different potential, both leading indicators as well as downstream impacts. That I think the only way to truly address risk is to take a 360-degree view of it. So to make sure you're monitoring your supplier's financial health and using that to look for kind of leading indicators or potential stresses. I mean, read your supplier's 10K, listen to their analyst calls. I mean, a lot of these things if you read between the lines, will come out in those types of public forums and public documents. And so really, I mean, we want you to take a 360-degree view of risk. I mean, capacity is just one element of a lot of other things that can happen to disrupt your supply chain. So I would say, look at your risk assessment, make sure capacity is a piece, but also make sure that all the other things that could impact capacity and could impact the health of your supply chain are in there as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question here is, which I totally love this question, which is hey, how do we know when when labor's the problem? Because there's so many lights out factories. You know, there's some factories out there that require almost no labor, even if they increase their capacities. So is there some way to figure out the ones that are more human resources exposed, or is that tough information to find?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think the capacity assessment that we offer our customers will give you an idea of that, because those factories that are more automated will be more likely to be able to support upsides, probably, as well as, you know, that's where you're kind of, you know, engaging your engineering teams, because a lot of times those individuals are pretty familiar with the production processes that go into the goods that they're qualifying, because they are the ones that have to qualify the processes a lot of times. So they can answer those questions for you as well. So again, it's a really a cross-functional approach, and, you know, collecting the data that you need to collect to make those decisions and determinations. But that's actually a great point.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions here, which are focused primarily on individual suppliers and stuff. And of course, we all reply to them, you know, privately. We don't want to mention suppliers. I think that first of all, I've got a surprising number of questions here. We have a surprising number of attendees. This seems to be a very interesting topic. We are going to send everybody here a recording of this event. And because we can see there are some companies that seem to have a large number of people who signed up, if you need this at a private company level, if you need us to kind of reproduce this with an open mic with your team, just send us an email, and we would be glad to reproduce this for you. Also, we have a fair number of articles on our blog that surround labor and supply shortage. You may be able to come to resilink.com blog. Matt, thank you very much. I appreciate this help. Thanks for your expertise. Any closing remarks, Matt?
No, I appreciate everybody's time.
Okay, thanks everybody. We've gone a little over the half-hour mark. We promised us 30 minutes. Thank you for your patience, and thanks for attending. We will send everybody the materials. Goodbye.
Thanks.